I would like to say thank you to all of you for attending the celebration of Ron's life. In the absence of any immediate family, this was only made possible by the diligence and hard work of Toby. And an especially big thank you to the Dutch contingent, great friends of Ron, who join us via the web link. The facts about Ron are few and far between. He was born on the 20th of July 1945, but very little else is known. Even his exact date of death is shrouded with mystery and only guessed at. What we do know is that he went to St Luke's Secondary Boys, and that his mum's greengrocer's on what once was Hog Lane, now Elm Road, has always been his home. It went from being a greengrocer to a CB radio shop briefly in the 80s, whilst Ron nursed his mother through dementia before it became the repository of his many collections of objets d'art. Ron once had a stall at Portobello and frequented the Hounslow boot sales market. On filing his death certificate, a member of the congregation had to determine how best to describe Ron's career. As the right descriptive words were stumbled over, the registrar, desperately trying to find an option on her drop-down menu which would correlate. He was a collector of things no longer required. An upcycler. Skip surfer. An expert in modern unwanted artefacts. I know, a rag and bone man. It was finally determined that he was, in fact, a restorer of antiquities. This would possibly have been a little bit lost on Ron, as his life's work was a living embodiment of the adage, one man's trash is another man's treasure. The reality is that he bought and sold precious things he had scooped out of a skip or stumbled on in the street. It is true that he couldn't pass anything without finding a value, and what he has jammed into his house and garden has yet to be fully appreciated. Maybe there really are treasures hidden there. It is part of his legacy that lives on. He will be remembered as a light-hearted, proper old character. Certainly many of you will remember being Ron, but although there was very much talk from Ron, little was actually said. It seems that everyone knew him for donkey's years, but we didn't really know him at all. We do know that Ron did his thing. He enjoyed life and music, Tottenham Hotspurs, bowling, and betting on the horses. He genuinely liked people. All of you here with us today, he collected you, his community, his truly valuable objects. We hope to find some laughter today as we remember him and his spirit. Ron had some friends in Holland, and these Dutch chums have written small eulogies in his memory. Attie and Renee wrote, "We first met Ron at the bowling exchange between Tolworth and Delft. Who knew such a thing existed? As we provide a place to stay for the people who come over and vice versa. We took Ron in as we have a spare room. Ron and Renee enjoyed each other's company and a new friendship was born. We invited Ron back again, just for a holiday as he was so easygoing, and we discovered a mutual love for the musician, Andre Roux, who we'll hear again later today. The three of us went for a concert and enjoyed it so much we made a return visit and had a third planned, which was sadly delayed by the pandemic and the consequent travel restrictions. Honestly, the best part of being with Ron at the concerts was that he enjoyed himself so much and was so outgoing, he shamelessly danced alone in the aisles. We also found out that Ron was an early bird. Getting up before the rest of us, he would take himself off for a walk around the block or do Tai Chi in the gardens. He never minded the neighbours watching. He just enjoyed being Ron. Artie and Renee's son, Ed, added this. I met Ron a few times at my parents' house when he was staying and thought he was an odd but friendly guy. However, we had a few conversations and I realised that I loved the way he looked at and enjoyed life. I think it's fair to say he changed my view on how to live and enjoy my own life. When my mum and Renee stopped the formal bowling exchange, I offered to have Ron as my guest. But as it happened, my plans changed, and so he did stay a night with my mum. But in typical easygoing Ron fashion, he said, "Okay, no problem. Just tell me what to do and where to go, and we'll make it happen." And we had a fabulous time. A year later, we bought a new house, and the first thing Rod said was that he was coming over to help me fix anything that needed to be done. I said, "Sure, whenever you like," but did not expect a call to say he was coming over in a fortnight. But that's Ron for you. He wanted to come, he treated it like a holiday, and we made it happen. We are so sad to hear he has passed away. To all of you gathered here today to pay your last respects to him, we are so grateful. Even though he passed away alone, it is so nice to know that there are many people who cared for him and don't want his last day on earth to be forgotten without a proper goodbye. Thanks from all of us. He will be missed. Atty and Renee, Edward and Diane, and the kids. We will now listen to some music that Ron loved. As the doors break on through to the other side.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, yeah. We chased our pleasures here, dug our treasures there, but can you still recall the time we cried? Break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side.
Memories of Ron. My wife Bronwen and I, and in later years our children, lived at 134 Elm Road between 1987 and 1999. We were Ron's direct neighbours for 12 years. And when I say direct neighbours, I have to qualify it by saying that between us and Ron's house was his storage facility. More about that in a second. We're very different people, but for most of the time, we got along pretty much fine. Ron did his thing, we did ours. We were civil, but we didn't mix socially. As I recall, he was a keen Tottenham fan and was an early adopter of satellite TV, so he could retreat into his home to watch his favourite team play. Ron's storage facility did cause friction between us, but only once caused a heated argument. The fence between our properties was about to collapse onto our front door due to the weight of goodness knows what, but it did involve the carcass and contents of an early 1970s transit van and other assorted collectibles. The van is still visible over the fence. Ron did eventually mend the fence, even though it was a Ron mend, so it didn't last very long. We continued to rub along as neighbours into the late 90s, and he became a real neighbour during this time when we were burgled. This happened twice, and on both occasions he was both helpful and very supportive. Thank you, Ron. We moved house in 1999, not far away, just onto Cambry Avenue, and we continued to see Ron quite regularly. As most houses in Cambry Avenue were extended up and out, he became a regular skip surfer, and we'd always have a little chat about something or other. We saw Ron as a genuine local man, honest and with very few airs and graces. He was an integral part of the local community, and we'll miss him as such. Thanks for being a decent bloke, Ron. Rest in peace.
Thank you, Nick. Is Jill here?
And I lived opposite Nick with my family. And I'm just going to say something about Ron and then just tell you 3 or 4 stories, very short little stories, just to give you a flavour of what a joy it was to live opposite him. He had a sort of sense of justice. He knew what was right, and he was outraged by things that weren't right. And he always had a story to tell about it. And there's always something going on, the row over the van or whatever. There was always something. He always had a story. In our family, he was a friend of ours and a friend of our children. And our daughters were growing up and teenagers. Divine, both lovely girls, but they had another life which we were not party to. And I have a very strong feeling that Ron was. And he always kept the boundary. And then every now and again, he would put his foot down. So I sort of knew the girls were having parties when we went out. But because they hoovered and tidied up afterwards, I thought it was okay. Anyway, on one particular occasion, 2 of the boys left the party and went and weed against Ron's wall. Ron was outraged. He was on our doorstep. It was a disgrace. These 2 girls were very nice girls, and they shouldn't be friends with people like that who did that sort of thing. So he kept the boundary most of the time. There was a time, I can't remember whether it was you, Amy, or Gemma, my other daughter, but you know when teenage girls hoik their skirts up just as they walk out the door? And they were walking past the door, past Manny's pub, here he is. And some of the older men wolf whistled them. And Ron was across that road so fast. And he gave them a lecture about how they should be respectful to these girls. They were local girls, and people should be nice to them. Then there was the story of the petrol can, which is probably my favourite story. Some of you who've lived in that area for a long time may remember that for a while we had a boat in the front garden because my partner was doing it up. And there was a petrol can, which was one of the old-fashioned ones, which was wanted. It wasn't plastic, it was tin. And so it was hidden around the back, but at some point or another it got stolen. And I don't know whether you were on duty then or Pete was on duty in the pub, but Ivan went over to the pub and asked everybody in the pub where the petrol can was. And Ron sort of looked at Ivan and said, "I'll have a word." 2 days later, the petrol can appeared and was on our doorstep. So when I next saw Ron, I said, "Shall I wait for Pete?" Of course it had to be you. Anyway, the next time I saw Ron, I said, "What about this petrol can?" I said, "Ivan's so pleased to get it back." So he said, "Well, I know everybody around here." He said, "I know the thieves." He said, "I don't mind a bit of thievery." He said, "But you never ever thieve on your own doorstep." He said, "So I had a word." So we got the petrol can back. And then the sort of last story I want to tell about it was, I then moved away from the area, or we all moved away from the area, but that's my path. I walked past that path. So he just greeted me when I sort of moved back to Kingston, as if I was still a neighbour. There was no question of where have you been all these years. He never was interested in that. He was interested in as I was at the moment, and how the girls, whatever. One day I was walking around, he had this enormous tarpaulin, and he was stretching it out across the corner. Well, I think we all know that corner. It's not the place to be doing a job in the middle of the road. No. It really isn't. And so he said, would I pull out one corner, and he'd pull out the other corner, and so we did that and chatted away. And then as I was walking away, I thought, what's the tarpaulin for? I've got no idea. But, for a few minutes I stood in the middle of the road, putting my life at risk for Ron to do whatever he wanted to do to the tarpaulin. I just wanted to go back to this sense of justice that he had. He could get angry. He could get truculent. But I think the thing that he always was kind. He was kind. And that is a real, real gift. And all I want to say is that it will always be Ron's corner for me.
Yeah.
And I will always look for him.
Thank you, Jill. Toby will now entertain us with his Ron memories.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Right. Hello, Ron. I'll just tell you a couple of stories. There's one off the top of my head. About 6 years ago, Ron asked me to, I'd help him mend his fence because it was leaning over at about a 45-degree angle. And the council were on his case to get it taken up right, or they would remove stuff from behind it. So I said to Ron, I'm more than happy to do that for you. Yeah, we'll do that. So I spent about 4 or 5 hours rebuilding this fence. And he came out afterwards and he said, that looks fantastic. That looks really good. Well done. You've done a great job there. Done a great job. I'm well pleased with that. I said, great. He said, right, how much do I owe you? I said, well, Ron, you don't owe me anything. I mean, it's a community service, let's face it. And he said, no, a good day's work deserves a good day's pay, he said. So, hey, you smoke, don't you? I said, for my sins, Ron, I do. He said, well, you wait right there. So off he went. And he came back and went, right. And he had this big box of Golden Virginia roll-up tobacco. And I thought, oh, wow, that's great. And he went, right, how many hours did you do? I said, about 4. He went, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That leaves me with 9. And off he goes. Anyway, so I stood there with this one packet of Golden Virginia. I thought, 4 hours, bloody work, I can believe it. Anyway, I thought, should I pull the fence back over a little bit? Anyway, suddenly he came out from behind me, tapped me on the shoulder, and he had another 3 in his pack, and he went, gotcha! Gotcha! Off he went. Anyway, a few months ago, I was walking past Ron's shop window, and I noticed amongst the organised chaos at the corner of what appeared to be an old piece of stained glass. And I asked Ron if he could pull it out for me so I could get a better look, because I collected old bits of glass, you see. He said he'd be more than happy to do that and for me to come back the next day, because it might take a bit of time to get in the shop, you see. So I came back the next day, and unfortunately it was somewhat modern for my liking, and not to mention it was slightly ruined, because somebody had at some point written a name on one of the panes of glass in bad black enamel paint. And Ron said, "Well, do you want it?" He said, "I'm sure your missus would love it." I said, "Well, no, not really, Ron, no." He said, "Why?" I said, well, my missus' name is Danielle." He said, "And?" I said, "Well, it says Deirdre on it." He said, "So?" I said, well, I don't think she really wants it. He said, "Have you asked her?" I said, "Well, no, not yet." He said, "Well, go and ask her." He said, "I'll tell you what, you go and ask her, get back to me. 35 quid. He said, "I'll hold it for you until you do." And off he went. So anyway, I thought... Anyway, a couple of weeks later, I was standing outside the Witch Elm having a pint, and I'd kind of forgotten about the stained glass thing, you know. And then I noticed slowly, coming towards me across the street, Ron. And I froze. I was remembering this glass. And he had that kind of John Wayne swagger on him, that you knew that you were in trouble, you know, as he got towards you. He came right up to me, he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, You didn't get back to me." And I said, he said, "You didn't get back to me?" And I said, well, I thought we'd kind of established, Ron, that it wasn't... He said, "No, you didn't ask her, did you?" I said, "Well, Ron, Deirdre?" He said, "No, okay, forget it." And he waved his finger at me, he said, "But you are missing a bargain." And off he went back to his place, slammed the door shut, and he never spoke to me again. So, I was told off by Ron, but I'd like to apologise to Ron right now for not getting back to you about that. I hope that by gathering these people together, you might forgive me. What's that? He says, "All right, yeah, okay." Anyway, finally, just a few days ago, I was passed by Ron's place once again, and I found myself perusing his oh so familiar Packed to the Rafters shop window. And no matter how many times I've looked in that window, I've always spotted something new, even though it's probably been there for 25 or 30 years. And there is a picture in that window, in a black frame that sits at a slight angle pressed up against the glass, and it depicts an old church in all its glory. And in the 17 years I've lived in Kingston, that picture has not faded one little bit. Even though it gets full afternoon sun most of the year and must boil in that window in the summer month, it hasn't faded at all. And it kind of reminds me of Ron. He never seemed to fade. He was always out there doing his thing, sweeping up, mending bits and pieces, giving a nod or a wave as he went by. And if he engaged you in conversation, you knew all about it. 5, 10, 45 minutes could go by. And you still could get a word in edgeways. You still had no idea of what or who he was talking about, but you stood and you listened. Because as we probably know, Ron was, in his unassuming way, in Ron's perfect way, really quite charming. But somehow I get the feeling we may still catch a glimpse of him now and again. I'd like to just say he was a jolly good fellow, so I think we should just do that one for me and for Ron. For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow. And so say all of us, and so say all of us, and so say all of us. For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow. And so say all of us. Hey! Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray! Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Toby. The world is without a doubt a sadder place without Ron. In a few moments, we'll listen to the live version of Volare, confident that were Ron here with us, he'd have a little boogie in the aisles. And then we'll leave here, led out by Nick and Jackie, and reconvene at the Wych Elm, overlooking Ron's home. And I wonder how many times we'll think of Ron, when passing a skip, or perhaps some unwanted potential treasure propped out for the rubbish men. And I trust that it will always make us smile. I also hope that we can be more Ron and always find the treasure in everything, from the detritus that life throws our way to each other. So let's raise a glass to Ron and his mysteries later on today. But first, let's listen to the King of the Waltz, Andre Rieu.